The idea of humans turning into wolves is ancient, older than written history as we know it, but once writing shows up, the trail becomes wonderfully clear and strange. The earliest recorded werewolf-adjacent story usually points to ancient Mesopotamia, around 2100 to 2000 BCE. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the goddess Ishtar turns a former lover into a wolf. It's not called werewolf in the modern sense, but the core idea is already there. Divine punishment, transformation, loss of human status. Wolves were feared competitors in early agrarian societies, so becoming one was a downgrade in the cosmic hierarchy. Ancient Greece takes the idea and sharpens it. Around the 5th century BCE, writers describe the myth of Lycaon, a king who serves human flesh to Zeus and is turned into a wolf as punishment. This story matters because it ties transformation to moral corruption and taboo, especially cannibalism. Even the word lycanthropy comes from this myth. The Greeks were already thinking psychologically as well as mythically. Rome inherits and spreads the idea. In the 1st century BCE, Virgil and Pliny the Elder write about men who transform into wolves, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. Pliny treats it almost like folklore reporting rather than pure myth, which is a fascinating shift. The idea starts to wobble between legend and maybe this happens. From there, the belief never really goes away. In medieval Europe, roughly 1100 to 1500 CE, werewolves become part of legal and religious thought. People are actually tried in courts for being werewolves, especially in France and the Holy Roman Empire. At this point, the myth fuses with Christian ideas of sin, the devil, and loss of God's grace. The werewolf isn't just dangerous, it's spiritually wrong. What's striking is the continuity. Over 4,000 years, the details change, but the skeleton of the myth stays the same. A human crosses a moral or social boundary, becomes something predatory, and reflects society's fear of what happens when civilization cracks. In other words, werewolves are less about wolves and more about us, what we fear we might become when rules, hunger, or rage take over. The myth survives because that fear never really goes extinct. Yes, that's a very clean, modern translation of the myth, psychologically rather than literally. Werewolves at their core are about boundary collapse. Someone who looks human, lives among humans, but feeds in a way that harms others. In old myths, the feeding is flesh. In real relationships, it's attention, care, validation, emotional labor, time, identity. Same structure, different fuel. Notice a few eerie overlaps. The transformation is often cyclical. Full moon, loss of control, then remorse. That maps uncomfortably well onto people who drain others during stress, insecurity, or crisis phases, then return to charm and normality. Werewolves rarely hunt strangers first. They turn on the village, the family, the lover. Emotional leeches usually do the same. Proximity makes feeding easier. In folklore, the danger isn't just violence, it's contagion. Bite marks, curses, slow turning. In relationships, that shows up as emotional depletion, self-doubt, walking on eggshells, losing your sense of self. And crucially, in many myths, the wolf isn't evil by default. It's someone who failed to integrate their shadow, their hunger, anger, fear. Instead of owning it, they let it run loose on others. So when people reach for werewolf metaphors today, they're not being dramatic. They're doing what humans have always done, using monsters to describe patterns that are hard to name directly. The myth gives shape to the feeling of being slowly consumed by someone who insists they can't help it. The old stories weren't warnings about wolves. They were warnings about intimacy without boundaries and about mistaking charm for safety. Exactly. Read them as maps of the inner world, not wildlife reports. Ancient people weren't naive. They knew humans don't sprout fur under moonlight. What they lacked was modern psychological language, so they used myth as a compression algorithm for complex human patterns: impulse, shame, hunger, dissociation, power. When an old text says he became a wolf, it's often pointing at a recognizable shift in behavior: loss of empathy, predation replacing reciprocity, appetite overruling conscience. Today we'd reach for terms like trauma response, addiction, narcissistic patterns, or emotional dysregulation. Back then, the wolf did the explanatory work. This is why those texts are so durable. Literal readings go stale quickly. Psychological readings stay fresh, because humans don't change much, only the costumes do. there's also a quiet sophistication in the myths. They rarely say the monster comes from nowhere. Transformation usually follows a transgression. Breaking hospitality laws, cannibalism, oath-breaking, abuse of power. In modern terms, violating trust. The monster is the consequence, not the cause. So when we read these stories psychologically, we're not modernizing them, we're restoring their original function. Myths were early field manuals for human nature, written in fur and moonlight, because that's what made people pay attention. Taken literally, they're curiosities. Taken psychologically, they're still diagnostic. Yes, that's a very precise way of putting it, and you're circling the heart of why myth exists at all. Ancient stories are symbolic containers. They're not trying to describe matter, they're trying to describe experience, especially the parts of experience that are overwhelming, shameful, ecstatic, or dangerous. Emotions, drives, and states of consciousness don't sit still long enough to be measured, so myth gives them bodies: wolves, gods, labyrinths, underworlds. When a story says someone is cursed, possessed, turned to stone, lost in the forest, or dragged underground, it's often describing a mind that has become stuck, trapped in grief, trapped in rage, trapped in obsession, trapped in a role they can't escape. The ancients didn't separate soul, mind, and behavior the way we do. To them, inner states were realities. That's why these stories feel dreamlike. Dreams work the same way. They don't lie, but they also don't speak literally. They speak in pressure, metaphor, and emotional geometry. Myth is the communal version of that. Your phrasing, where the human soul and consciousness can get engrossed and trapped, fits uncannily well. Many myths are warnings about identification. When a person collapses into a single drive or wound and forgets they are more than it. The werewolf becomes hunger, Narcissus becomes self-regard, Sisyphus becomes futile repetition. The underworld is depression long before it's a place. And importantly, myths often include a way out, recognition, naming the monster, completing a task, returning with knowledge. That's not accidental. They weren't just describing traps, they were sketching escape routes. So yes, ancient stories are less about what exists and more about what can happen to a human being. They are atlases of consciousness drawn by people who didn't have psychology, but who paid very close attention to what it feels like to be human when things go wrong, or very, very right.